Racist police pulls over a colonel by mistake. What happens next is shocking. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Colonel David Ellison was just trying to get home from church. A cop saw a suspicious black man behind the wheel and nearly pulled his weapon, but what came after that traffic stop changed everything. The SUV eased onto the shoulder of Summerlin Drive, just outside Maughan, Georgia, kicking up a bit of dust from the loose gravel. Colonel David Ellison, recently retired from the U.S. Army, had just left Sunday service. He wasn't in uniform, hadn't been for a while now. Today, he wore what his wife called his off-duty dad look, a navy blue polo tucked neatly into pressed khaki slacks, loafers polished like he still had inspection. He didn't need to check the speedometer. He already knew, 33. The limit was 35. No missed lights, no lane swerves, no music thumping through the windows. Just him, a nearly empty road, and the feeling that something was off. That feeling was confirmed when the red and blue lights lit up behind him. David exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. Years of service taught him not to react too quickly. You assess. You stay composed. You don't escalate. He pulled over near an old convenience store that hadn't had a working ice machine in 5 years. A few folks sat under the front awning, nursing sodas and lottery tickets. As David put the car in park, he watched them glance over, then quickly look away. They didn't want to be involved. Not out here. Behind him, the cruiser door opened. The officer didn't rush. He moved with caution, like a man approaching a threat he didn't understand. David saw the hand placement, right hand resting close to the holster. That told him more than the badge or the name tag ever could. David lowered his window and placed both hands on the steering wheel, plain and visible. His tone was even, neutral. "Afternoon, officer." The man didn't respond at first. He was tall, mid-30s maybe, buzz-cut, with pale skin that pinked slightly under the Georgia sun. His eyes flicked over the interior of the SUV, then back to David. "License and registration," the officer said curtly. David nodded once. "Sure thing. My wallet is in my back pocket. Registration's in the glove compartment." The officer didn't say, "Go ahead," just stared. David moved slowly, narrating each step. "Reaching into my back pocket now. Here's the license. Opening the glove box. Registration's in the folder." He handed both over. The officer glanced at them, then back at David. "This your car?" "No," David replied. "It's my wife's. My name's on the insurance." The officer's stance shifted. His jaw flexed slightly. "You got any proof of that?" David blinked. "Her name's on the registration." "Michelle Ellison. Does it mean you're not borrowing it without permission?" David tilted his head. "With respect, officer, I just left church. You can call her if you like." The officer didn't move. He just kept staring, the kind of stare that tried to read more than words could offer. David had seen that look in combat zones, when someone sized you up before deciding whether to trust you. But this wasn't a war zone. This was home. "Step out of the vehicle for me," the officer said suddenly. David hesitated. "On what grounds?" "You're being difficult. I'm answering your questions calmly. That's up for me to decide." David knew the danger in this moment, how fast things could go wrong, not because of what he'd done, but because of how someone felt. He took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. But just then, the officer's hand twitched near his holster. David froze. "Are you going to draw on me for opening my door?" The officer didn't respond. His eyes narrowed. The silence thickened. People at the store were watching now, one with a phone held low in their lap, possibly recording. David slowly let go of the handle and raised his hands again. "Let's not do something we'll both regret," he said quietly. But before the officer could respond, the low whine of another cruiser broke the tension, and backup pulled onto the gravel. The second cruiser rolled up behind the first, its engine purring as the driver's side door opened. Officer Elena Ruiz stepped out, mid-40s, short and sharp-featured, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She scanned the scene quickly, noting the tense posture of her colleague and the stillness of the man in the driver's seat. "Logan," she called calmly as she walked toward him. "What's going on?" Officer Logan Pierce didn't answer right away. His shoulders were tight, one hand still hovering close to his firearm. He didn't look at her. He just kept his eyes locked on David, who still had both hands up, gripping the top of the steering wheel. "This man's being uncooperative," Pierce said finally. Refusing to exit the vehicle, Ruiz glanced at David, then back at Pierce. "Did he threaten you?" "No," Pierce admitted. But the vehicle doesn't belong to him. David spoke up, keeping his voice measured. It's my wife's SUV. I offered ID and registration. Officer Pierce didn't accept that. Ruiz stepped a little closer, angling her body to see David's face better. Sir, can I ask your name? Colonel David Ellison, retired. My license is in your partner's hand. If he reads it, he'll see I live 5 minutes from here. The word colonel seemed to hang in the air. Pierce squinted, clearly irritated that his authority was being questioned. We don't need a resume, he muttered. But Ruiz's eyes flickered. You said Ellison? She asked. David nodded. Yes, ma'am. She took a small step back, glanced at the license in Pierce's hand, then her expression shifted just slightly. Recognition. She had heard that name before, maybe from her cousin, who mentioned an Ellison at a fundraiser for returning veterans last fall. Meanwhile, Pierce's tone turned sharper. Sir, I'm not going to tell you again. Step out of the vehicle. David looked at Ruiz, choosing his words carefully. Am I being detained or am I free to go? Pierce stepped forward. You're not free to do anything until I say so. Ruiz stepped in between them. Logan, we need to talk. Over here, now. They walked a few steps back toward the cruisers, voices low but firm. From the driver's seat, David could hear none of it. But he watched their body language. Ruiz looked calm, professional. Pierce looked increasingly frustrated. His jaw moved like he was grinding his teeth. Then suddenly, he threw up his hands in exasperation and walked back towards the passenger side of his cruiser. Ruiz returned alone. Colonel Ellison, I apologize. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. I'd say so, David replied with a thin smile. Misunderstanding usually doesn't come with a hand on the gun. I agree, she said. But please understand, I just arrived. I can't speak for what happened before I got here. What I can say is that I'll be filing a report, and you're free to go. David reached slowly for the gear shift, then stopped. Ma'am, I have a question. If I didn't say who I was, if I'd just been David from down the street, would I be on the ground right now? Ruiz paused. The silence that followed said more than anything she might have answered. That's what I thought, David said softly. He pulled onto the road and drove off. The onlookers at the store watched his taillights disappear. The man with the phone finally stopped recording. No one said a word, but they were all thinking the same thing. That man didn't do anything wrong, and it could have gone so much worse. But David didn't drive home in silence, because his phone rang, and the name on the screen told him this wasn't going to stay quiet. David pulled into the driveway, exhaled, and just sat there for a moment. The engine idled low as he watched the afternoon sun cut shadows across the lawn. He wasn't angry, not yet. What he felt was something heavier, a weight behind the ribs, that quiet, familiar knowing that something had almost gone terribly wrong and there wouldn't have been a rewind button. The screen on his phone was still lit. Missed call, Anthony Rhodes. He dialed back. Anthony answered before the first ring finished. David, you good? Define good, David replied. You okay though? I heard something. One of my guys came through the scanner. Said your name came up in a call with law enforcement. David sighed. Yeah. Got pulled over by a cop who thought I stole Michelle's car. You're kidding. I wish. Anthony was an old friend. Worked for the Bibb County Commissioner's office now, but they'd known each other since ROTC in college. He had a way of getting news before it hit the airwaves. You were coming from Zion, right? Right. Just turned off Thomas Road. There was a pause. David, did Logan Pierce pull you over? David straightened. You know him? Everyone does. He's been counseled more times than I can count. He baits people, almost always black men. He's careful but not smart. David gritted his teeth. He had his hand on his weapon before I even spoke. That doesn't surprise me. Listen, this isn't staying quiet. Ruiz was there, right? Yeah. She de-escalated it, handled it right. Anthony clicked his tongue. Still, words spreading. Someone filmed the last few minutes of it outside the corner store. It's going to hit Facebook before the sun sets. David rubbed his temple. I didn't want this. I didn't do anything. You existing was enough for him to act like you did. There was silence. Anthony continued. Come down to my office tomorrow. We need to talk options. And David? Yeah? I don't care how calm you were. That could have gone sideways. I'm glad you're still here, man. That stuck with him. Still here. Like surviving a war zone in your own neighborhood. But Anthony was right. The video did hit social media fast. Within 2 hours, someone tagged the local news station. Another tagged the police department's Facebook page. Then came the comments. Some folks just wanted to know what happened. Others demanded answers. And a few twisted it around, saying David must have done something to draw that kind of attention. He expected that. What he didn't expect was a call at 6:45 p.m. from someone inside the department. Colonel Ellison? Yes. This is Lieutenant Mason Reed with the Internal Affairs Division. Do you have a moment? David stepped into his home office and closed the door. I do. I want to begin by saying, this isn't an official statement request, not yet. But I need to know, do you plan to file a complaint? David hesitated. Not because he wasn't sure what happened, he was crystal clear, but because he knew what it would mean. I haven't decided, he said finally. I understand. We'll be reviewing body cam footage tonight. I'll be in touch. David ended the call and looked out the window, past the driveway, where the SUV now sat parked and still. That car had gotten him home, but it could have been a whole different story. And the town wasn't sleeping this off, because by morning, the phone would ring again. But this time, it wouldn't be a friend. It would be a reporter. Michelle Ellison didn't say much when David told her what happened. She listened, arms crossed, leaning against the kitchen counter, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. When he got to the part about the officer almost drawing his weapon, her hand clenched the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. I've been driving that car for years, she said, and I've never once been pulled over. David gave a soft nod. That's what I'm saying. Michelle's voice dropped to a whisper, almost to herself. And if he had drawn on you, she couldn't finish. She just shook her head and stepped out of the room. The next morning, David sat across from Anthony in the county building, third floor, corner office that smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. Anthony had already pulled up the video. It was grainy, but clear enough. You could see David's calm. You could see the posture of the officer. You could hear the tension even without subtitles. This is going to light a fire, Anthony said. You ready for that? David leaned back in his chair. I didn't ask for this. No, but it's here. The county had already received 3 written complaints from citizens who watched the video. A 4th came from an anonymous staffer at the local high school, someone who knew Michelle from PTA meetings. The pressure was building fast. By lunchtime, Police Chief Warren Beckett held a private meeting with department leadership. We're in a bind, he said, standing at the head of the long table in the station's upstairs conference room. We've got a decorated veteran, well known in the community, saying he was profiled. Video spreading. People are pissed. Captain Samuel Tate folded his arms. We're jumping to conclusions. Logan says the guy was being evasive. That's textbook behavior for a stolen vehicle. Beckett's voice hardened. Evasive? He was going 33 in a 35. A few officers shifted in their chairs. No one met the chief's eyes. We've had this conversation before, Beckett said. Too many times. The patterns are there. And frankly, I'm tired of seeing Pierce's name in my inbox. Another officer, a younger one named Jordan Blake, cleared his throat. Sir, what do we do next? We're reviewing his body cam. Then we bring in Colonel Ellison for an official statement. And if what we see matches what's already out there, we're suspending Pierce pending a formal investigation. Captain Tate let out a small scoff. We're really going to toss one of our own under the bus over a PR mess. Beckett glared at him. We're not tossing anyone. We're holding people accountable. There's a difference. Across town, in living rooms and group texts, people were having their own conversations. He's one of the good ones, a woman said during a small group meeting at a church near Vineville Avenue. We've known David for years. He helped fix our fence after that tornado. At a diner, 2 retired vets sat over coffee. One of them leaned in close. You think this would have happened if he was white? His friend didn't answer right away, just stared at the coffee swirling in his mug. And at the high school where Michelle taught part-time, one of her colleagues, Mr. Halverson, social studies, walked up to her in the break room. Hey, Michelle, just so you know, I saw the video. I'm really sorry. That shouldn't have happened. Michelle gave him a small nod. It didn't just happen. Someone made it happen. But as more people started paying attention, the question shifted from, did this happen, to what are we going to do about it? By midweek, the video had been shared over 30,000 times, not just in Georgia either. It reached as far as Texas, Ohio, even Oregon. Someone tagged a popular military veteran page, and suddenly David's name was circulating among communities he didn't even know existed. But closer to home, things were more complicated. At a small protest on the courthouse steps, about 50 people showed up. Some held signs. A few wore army green in support of David. A local pastor led a prayer circle, and an older woman named Mrs. Thompson, who remembered David from her son's days in ROTC, stood on the steps and said, loud enough for the reporters to hear, "Some people need to be reminded. Wearing a uniform don't mean you're safe. It just means they hesitate a few seconds longer." That line made it onto the 6 News. Inside homes, it sparked even deeper conversations. White families who'd known the Ellisons for years were asking themselves hard questions, not because they'd been part of the problem, but because for the first time they couldn't deny the problem existed. At a kitchen table on Chestnut Lane, a teenager named Travis looked at his mom after watching the news and asked, "Would that cop have pulled me over like that?" His mom hesitated. "No," she admitted. "I don't think he would have." "So why?" "I think," she said slowly, "we need to talk more about that." But not everyone was interested in listening. Online, a few loud voices pushed back. "This is just anti-police propaganda. He should have followed orders. Cops have a right to protect themselves." David saw some of the comments. He didn't reply. Didn't need to, because the truth didn't require debate. Back at the station, Chief Warren Beckett made his move. He called a press conference, standing stiff behind a podium, the town seal over his left shoulder. He addressed a room packed with reporters, community leaders, and concerned residents. After reviewing the footage, speaking with multiple officers, and meeting with Colonel Ellison personally, Beckett said, "The department has chosen to place Officer Logan Pierce on administrative leave pending a full investigation. This is not a presumption of guilt," he added. "It is a commitment to due process and to accountability." Someone asked if Pierce had a history of complaints. Beckett's answer was carefully worded. "There have been prior incidents. I cannot comment on open internal cases." Then a different question. "What message are you sending to black residents of this town?" Beckett didn't hesitate this time. That what happened was wrong, that it was preventable, and that it matters. David wasn't at the press conference. He was at home, watching from the couch. Michelle sat next to him, holding his hand. "You think they'll do anything real?" she asked. David thought for a moment, then said, "They will now, because people are watching." At the same time, students at the local high school staged a walkout. Not a loud, flashy protest, just hundreds of teenagers standing outside in silence for 10 minutes. 1 minute for every second that passed between David asking, "Am I being detained?" and Pierce nearly reaching for his weapon. Photos from the walkout went viral. People started paying attention for a reason bigger than just David. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what his moment revealed. The cracks in the system. The quiet ways respect could disappear. The unspoken fear too many people lived with. And maybe, just maybe, the possibility that it didn't have to be this way. But even with the world watching, consequences don't come easy. And David still had one more step to take. It was a full week later when David finally walked into town hall. Not for a private conversation, but to speak in front of a packed auditorium. The event wasn't a protest. It wasn't even organized by him. It started with a group of local veterans who had quietly called in favors, made flyers, reached out to clergy and school principals. What they wanted wasn't noise. They wanted voices, honest ones. David stood behind a wooden podium that creaked when he leaned forward. He wasn't dressed in anything special, just a button-down and slacks. No ribbons, no medals. He didn't need them. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," he said, voice low but clear. "But silence didn't keep me safe last Sunday. So here I am." The room held its breath. "I'm not here to destroy a man's life. I'm here because mine could have been taken on the side of a road, for no reason at all. Because if someone who served this country for more than 2 decades can be treated like a suspect before a human being, what does that mean for everybody else?" People nodded. Some looked away, blinking back heat behind their eyes. "I've been called sir in war zones by people with rifles aimed at me. And I've been called suspicious by a man trained to serve and protect, right here in my hometown." He paused. "I don't want a parade. I want a change in protocol. I want more than just leave without pay. I want an apology, not just to me, but to every kid in this town who saw that video and thought, if it can happen to him, it can happen to me." A single clap broke out, then another, then a ripple of applause filled the room. It wasn't thunderous. It was steady. Like people who weren't just reacting, they were agreeing. The mayor, a slim woman in her 60 seconds named Mayor Caroline Shaw, took the mic next. "I hear you," she said simply. "I hear all of you. She promised to push for a civilian oversight board. She committed to reviewing department training. She didn't make dramatic promises, but she didn't offer excuses either. Outside town hall, a group of young men who had never met David before approached him. "You said everything we wanted to say," one of them said. David shook his head. "You don't need me to say it. You need to keep saying it." Meanwhile, Officer Logan Pierce was officially suspended. The department confirmed that past complaints, 5 in total, had been quietly dismissed over the last 3 years. Now, each one was being reopened. A separate inquiry began to review whether any of those complaints were mishandled. For Pierce, the road ahead looked uncertain. For the town, it was more than just one man's misconduct. It was the start of a reckoning. Departments that had gone unchecked for years were finally facing scrutiny. Leaders who once stayed silent found themselves answering questions they never thought they'd hear in public. Some community members resisted, called it overreaction, said the town was fine before all this. But even they couldn't pretend the atmosphere hadn't changed. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, Michelle and David went to the grocery store. Near the checkout, a woman they didn't recognize approached them. "I watched your speech," she said. "I don't know what it's like, but I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're still here." David gave a small smile. "So am I." And he meant it. Not because things were perfect now. Not because the fight was over, but because something had cracked open and light was starting to get through. But change isn't just about a moment. It's about what you do after. And David wasn't done. Not yet. 1 year later, David stood in front of a different kind of room. This one was quiet, clean, well lit. The classroom at the Mon Police Training Facility didn't have rows of chairs like Town Hall. It had desks, real ones, with notepads, water bottles, and nervous young recruits who'd been up since 5 a.m. David scanned the faces in front of him. Most were in their 22nds. A few older, black, white, Latino. Some looked eager. Others looked guarded. All of them were watching him. He cleared his throat. "My name is David Ellison. I'm not here today as a former colonel. I'm not here as the guy from that video. I'm here because I was asked to speak to you about something simple. How you treat people." No one moved. "I'm not going to give you a speech about honor or flags or duty," he said. "What I'll give you is this. If you walk up to a car and the first thing you feel is fear, you need to ask yourself where that fear is coming from. And if the answer's about them, not you, you're not ready for that badge." One of the trainees raised his hand, unsure. "Sir, what if someone is a threat? What if hesitation gets us hurt?" David nodded. "That's real. I won't pretend it's not. But fear and judgment aren't the same thing. Fear keeps you cautious. Judgment makes you dangerous." The instructor, Officer Elena Ruiz, stood in the back, arms crossed. She gave a small nod. This new program was her idea. After the incident, she pushed for bias and de-escalation training to become mandatory in every academy cycle. Chief Beckett approved it without blinking. David continued, walking slowly between the desks. "Let me tell you something. That day I was pulled over for no reason. I was polite. I followed directions. I didn't yell. And still, I saw a man get ready to draw on me. He didn't know me. He didn't care. He saw a black man in a car he thought didn't belong." David stopped near the front of the room. "You do that to the wrong person, and somebody ends up dead. And then, it's not a training scenario anymore. It's your life, your name, your face on the screen." The silence grew heavy. Then he broke it. "But it doesn't have to be that way. You can choose better. Every day, every stop, every interaction, you can choose not to treat people like suspects before they speak." After the session, one of the recruits, a young black man named Jalen Price, caught up to him in the hallway. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Sure," David said. Jalen shifted his weight. "Why'd you agree to do this, after everything that happened?" "I don't know if I could walk in here." David looked at him for a long second. "Because people like you are in this room. Because the change I want won't come from yelling at old minds. It's going to come from making sure the new ones don't repeat the same mistakes." Jalen nodded slowly. "I won't forget that." Back in the parking lot, David slipped into the driver's seat of the same SUV. He sat for a moment, watching the afternoon light fall across the dash. Then he started the engine. Michelle called while he was still backing out. "How'd it go?" "They listened," he said. "Some of them really listened. She smiled through the phone. That's all we can hope for. David didn't respond right away. He thought about the past year, the speeches, the meetings, the long conversations with people who finally stopped defending what they didn't understand, the quiet apologies, the slow, careful steps forward. He pulled onto the road and said, almost to himself, "It's not everything, but it's something. And sometimes, something is where the change begins."